Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, here to lead you through tonight's chilling journey. If you find these stories help you unwind or gently guide you to sleep, consider supporting the channel by liking this video and subscribing if you haven't already. It truly helps bring more of these stories to you. Also, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and the time where you are. It's always fascinating to connect with listeners around the world. So, take a deep breath, settle in, and prepare yourself for a night of mystery and suspense. It started with a phone call late one night. I was half asleep when the sharp vibration of my phone jarred me awake. Groggily, I reached over to my nightstand, squinting at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code matched my town. It could have been someone I knew, or maybe a misdial. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I swiped to answer. Hello? At first, there was silence on the other end. Then, faintly, I heard breathing. Slow, deliberate. "Who is this?" I asked, irritation seeping into my voice. Still no response. Just the sound of breathing, steady and close. Then a faint voice whispered, "I've been waiting for you." I sat up in bed, fully awake now. What? Who is this? The line went dead. My heart was racing, but I brushed it off. Probably some prank or a wrong number. I set the phone down and tried to go back to sleep, though my mind wouldn't let go of the unsettling call. The next morning I checked my call log. The number wasn't listed, as if the call had never happened. That should have been my first clue to let it go, but instead I decided to dig deeper. That evening, as I was settling in to watch some TV, my phone buzzed again. It was the same number. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Hello?" This time the voice spoke right away, a low whisper that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't have answered." My hand trembled as I gripped the phone. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm closer than you think," the voice replied, followed by a faint, distorted chuckle. The line went dead again. I immediately blocked the number and tried to shake off the encounter. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside felt amplified. Around midnight, I got another call. This time, it came from my best friend's number. Relieved, I picked up. "Hey, why are you calling so late?" But instead of my friend's familiar voice, I heard the same whisper. "Blocking me won't work." My stomach dropped. How are you doing this?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, I heard a faint tapping sound, rhythmic and steady. Tap, tap, tap. Then a sentence that made my blood run cold. "Do you hear that?" "I'm outside." I jumped up and rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain. The street was empty, bathed in the faint glow of a streetlight. No one was there. "You're lying," I said, my voice shaking. The whisper came again, amused this time. "Look closer." I scanned the street again, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the shadows at the far end of the block. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. I couldn't make out any details, but the sight of them froze me in place. I dropped the curtain and backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. My phone buzzed again, and against my better judgment, I answered. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. The voice on the other end chuckled softly. "Because you let me in." "What does that even mean?" I yelled. "You answered the call," it replied simply, as if that explained everything. The tapping sound returned, louder now. It wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from inside the house. I spun around, trying to locate the source. My heart felt like it would explode as the tapping grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hand slick with sweat, and crept toward the noise. It was coming from the hallway closet. I stood there, knife trembling in my grip, debating whether to open the door. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. That silence was worse than the noise. Slowly I reached for the doorknob and yanked it open. Nothing. The closet was empty except for some coats and a few boxes. I stepped back, confused and terrified. That's when I noticed my phone screen had lit up again. Another call. This time, it wasn't a number, just a blank screen. I didn't answer. Instead, I threw the phone across the room, the screen shattering on impact. The tapping started again, louder than before, coming from all around me now. "Stop it!" I screamed, clutching the knife like it could somehow protect me. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath as the tapping turned into banging, as if someone, or something, was trying to break through the walls. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The house was silent again. No tapping, no banging, no whispering. I stood there in the middle of the room, shaking and clutching the knife, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The silence didn't last long. My phone buzzed, despite the shattered screen. I didn't want to answer, but something compelled me to pick it up. This time, there was no whisper, just a single distorted sentence. "You can't escape me." And then, the line went dead for good. I moved out the next day. I don't know what I let into my life that night, but I know one thing: I'll never answer an unknown number again. St. Augustine's Hospital had been abandoned for over 2 decades, yet it still loomed over the town like a shadow of its former self. Stories circulated about why it closed: botched surgeries, missing patients, even whispers of illegal experiments. But none of that deterred me. I was young, broke, and desperate for a job, so when a private security firm offered me a well-paying night shift to monitor the premises, I accepted without hesitation. The job seemed straightforward. Sit in the small security office, watch the old CCTV monitors, and report any signs of trespassers. A recent uptick in urban explorers and thrill seekers breaking in had prompted the owners to hire someone to keep watch. I didn't expect much excitement, and for the first few nights, I was right. The hospital's corridors, visible through grainy black and white feeds, were eerily quiet. Empty gurneys sat in corners, gathering dust. Faded signs with phrases like "patient recovery" and "operating room" hung crookedly on the walls. The only sound was the faint hum of the monitors and the occasional creak of the old building settling. But on the 4th night, things changed. It was just past 2 a.m. when I noticed movement on one of the screens. A shadow flickered in the hallway outside what used to be the pediatric ward. I leaned closer, thinking it was a trick of the low-quality camera, but the shadow moved again, unmistakably. I grabbed the walkie-talkie to radio the backup team, but my voice faltered. What would I even say? "There's a shadow on the screen?" It sounded ridiculous. Instead, I decided to investigate. Equipped with a flashlight and my flimsy sense of bravery, I stepped into the cold, musty air of the hospital. My boots echoed loudly against the tiled floors as I made my way to the pediatric ward. The shadow had been near room 305. When I reached the hallway, it was empty. The beam of my flashlight revealed peeling paint and broken ceiling tiles, but no sign of anyone. Just as I turned to leave, a soft sound stopped me in my tracks. A faint giggle, like a child's. My blood turned to ice. I swung the flashlight around, but the corridor remained empty. The sound came again, louder this time, coming from room 305. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the gap. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "If someone's in there, you need to leave. This is private property." No response. Summoning what little courage I had left, I pushed the door open. The room was empty, save for a rusted hospital bed and a few broken toys scattered across the floor, remnants of its former purpose. A tiny doll sat upright on the bed, its glass eyes staring blankly ahead. I backed out of the room, my pulse racing. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. The doll's head had turned. I didn't stick around to investigate. Back in the security office, I locked the door and sat in my chair, trying to calm my nerves. The monitors flickered, static crackling across the screens. One by one, the cameras cut out until only one remained, the feed for the operating theater on the first floor. The room was supposed to be empty, but a figure stood in the center. It was a man in a long, dark coat, his back to the camera. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at the operating table. I grabbed the walkie-talkie, my hands trembling. "This is Officer Hall. I need backup at St. Augustine's. There's someone in the building." The radio crackled, but no response came. I turned back to the monitor. The man was gone. A loud bang echoed from the hallway outside the office. My heart nearly stopped. Gripping my flashlight like a weapon, I slowly opened the door and stepped out. The hallway was empty, but a trail of muddy footprints led away from the office, heading toward the elevator at the end of the corridor. The elevator hadn't worked in years. Against my better judgment, I followed the trail. The footprints stopped abruptly in front of the elevator. The doors were partially open, revealing a dark shaft. I shone my flashlight down, but the beam barely penetrated the darkness. That's when I heard it, a voice, soft and hoarse, whispering my name. Hall, Hall. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The voice was coming from the elevator shaft, growing louder and more insistent. Come down here. We've been waiting for you. I ran. Back in the security office, I grabbed my things and bolted for the exit. As I reached the front doors, they slammed shut in front of me. The sound reverberated through the building, followed by faint whispers coming from every direction. You shouldn't have come here. The lights flickered and the air grew colder. I turned to see shadows pooling at the far end of the hallway, coalescing into shapes, figures with hollow eyes and twisted grins. I don't remember much after that. When I came to, it was morning. The front doors were wide open, sunlight streaming in. My boss found me sitting outside, shaking and mumbling incoherently. I quit on the spot. To this day, I don't know what I encountered in St. Augustine's. All I know is that I'll never step foot in that building again. Whatever haunts those halls can stay there. There's something unnerving about being alone in a house, even one you've lived in for years. It was my parents' house, a 2-story home on the edge of town. They had gone on a weekend trip, leaving me in charge of the house while they visited relatives. I wasn't scared of being alone. At 22, I'd stayed by myself countless times, but this time felt different. It started on the first night. I had just finished watching a horror movie marathon, the kind that leaves your nerves on edge. I laughed at myself for jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. Just the wind, I muttered, pulling a blanket tighter around me. Around midnight, I decided to head to bed. I made sure all the doors were locked, double-checked the windows, and turned off the lights downstairs. My room was on the second floor, facing the backyard. As I climbed into bed, I glanced out the window. The backyard was dark, the trees casting long shadows under the dim glow of a distant street lamp. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the yard, motionless. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but the figure was still there. It was tall and unmoving, its outline blurred by the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. Maybe it's a tree, I whispered to myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I closed the curtains and climbed back into bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, set my nerves on edge. When I finally drifted off, I had strange dreams. Dreams of someone standing at the foot of my bed, just staring. The second night. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined the figure in the yard. Maybe it was a neighbor cutting through or a shadow cast by the trees. By day, the backyard seemed harmless, almost serene. But that night, things escalated. I was in the kitchen, making a late-night snack, when I heard the faint sound of footsteps upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, straining to hear over the hum of the refrigerator. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving down the hall toward my room. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. Gripping a kitchen knife, I crept up the stairs. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from my room at the end. My door was ajar, though I was certain I'd closed it. I pushed the door open, holding the knife in front of me. The room was empty, but something felt off. The air was colder, heavier. Then I noticed it. My curtains were open, the window slightly ajar. I hurried to close it, glancing outside. The backyard was empty, but as I pulled the curtain shut, I saw something on the glass. Fingerprints, smudged and smeared, as if someone had been pressing their face against the window. The third night. By the third night, I was on edge. I kept all the lights on, even in rooms I wasn't using. I carried the kitchen knife with me everywhere, feeling ridiculous but too scared to let my guard down. It was around 11 p.m. when the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, the hum of appliances replaced by an oppressive silence. My phone flashlight flickered on as I tried to calm myself. "It's just a power outage," I whispered. "Happens all the time." But as I made my way to the breaker box in the basement, I heard it again. Footsteps, this time coming from the living room. I stopped halfway down the stairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the house. The footsteps stopped. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept toward the living room. The beam of my flashlight swept over the furniture, revealing nothing out of place. But then I noticed something. My front door, which I had locked, was wide open. Cold air seeped in, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and damp leaves. I slammed the door shut and locked it again, checking every lock and window in the house. My heart was racing, my mind conjuring every possible scenario. Was someone inside? Were they toying with me? The final night. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch, the knife in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to call the police at the first sign of danger. Around 3 a.m., I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from the window behind me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. Gathering my courage, I slowly turned around. There, on the other side of the glass, was a face. It was pale and expressionless, with hollow black eyes that seemed to pierce through me. The figure's hand was pressed against the glass, its fingers long and spindly, tapping in an unnatural rhythm. I screamed, stumbling backward and dropping my knife. The face didn't move, didn't react. It just stared. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. As I waited for the operator, the figure slowly backed away from the window, disappearing into the darkness. When the police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. They assured me it was probably a prank, but I knew better. I stayed at a friend's house for the rest of the weekend, too scared to go back. When my parents returned, I told them everything. They dismissed it as my imagination, the result of watching too many horror movies. But every so often, late at night, I hear that rhythmic tapping in my dreams. And when I wake up, I can't help but feel like I'm still being watched. I never thought I'd be the one posting on r/no-sleep. I've read countless stories on there, always scoffing, thinking, this could never happen to me. But here I am, typing this out at 3 a.m., hands shaking, eyes darting toward the shadows of my room. It started last month when I moved into a small, cheap apartment. It wasn't much, but for someone just out of college, it was all I could afford. The building was old, creaking with every step, and the stairwell smelled like mildew. Still, I was excited to have a place of my own. The first week was uneventful. I spent my evenings unpacking and binge-watching horror movies, the kind of comfort that made the loneliness feel a little less sharp. But then the noises started. At first it was faint, a soft scratching sound coming from the stairwell just outside my door. I dismissed it as the old building settling or maybe a stray cat finding its way inside. But each night the sound grew louder, closer. One night as I lay in bed scrolling Reddit, I heard a soft knock on my door. I froze. It was almost midnight and I wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly I got up and tiptoed to the peephole. The hallway light flickered faintly, casting eerie shadows. But there was no one there. I opened the door a crack, my heart pounding. The hallway was empty, but the scratching noise was louder now, coming from beneath the stairs. Curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing my phone as a flashlight, I crept toward the stairwell, The air grew colder with each step, and the scratching stopped the moment I reached the bottom of the stairs. I shone my light around, but saw nothing, just the dusty stained carpet and the chipped paint on the walls. Feeling silly, I turned to head back upstairs. That's when I heard it. A whisper. "Don't leave." I whipped around, my phone shaking in my hand. The light illuminated the space beneath the stairs, and for a split second, I thought I saw something, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. I ran. The second encounter. The next morning, I convinced myself it was a dream. I had been tired, maybe even half asleep when it happened. But deep down, I knew better. That night, the noises returned, louder and more insistent. The scratching was joined by faint whispers, unintelligible but persistent. I tried to drown it out with headphones, blasting music until my ears ached. But when I finally took them off, the noises were still there, clearer than ever. And then came the footsteps. Soft, deliberate, they echoed through the hallway, stopping right outside my door. I held my breath, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The doorknob rattled slightly, as if someone was testing it. Summoning my courage, I shouted, "Who's there?" The noises stopped. The third night. I was ready to leave, to break my lease and never look back. But something compelled me to stay, a morbid curiosity mixed with fear. I needed to know what was beneath the stairs. Armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat, I waited until the scratching began. This time I didn't hesitate. I marched down the stairs, determined to confront whatever was haunting me. As I approached the stairwell, the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. The scratching grew frantic, like claws raking against wood. I shone my light beneath the stairs. There was a small door I hadn't noticed before, hidden by the shadows. It was old and rotting, barely hanging on its hinges. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to know. I pried the door open, and the smell hit me first. Damp, earthy, with a hint of decay. The space beyond was pitch black, too dark for my flashlight to penetrate. "Is someone in there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Silence. And then, laughter. It started as a low chuckle, growing louder and more distorted, echoing around me. I dropped the flashlight, stumbling backward as a hand shot out from the darkness. It was skeletal, with long, twisted fingers that seemed to reach for me. I didn't stop to see what it was. I ran up the stairs, slamming my door shut and locking it. The aftermath. I haven't gone near the stairwell since that night. The noises continue, but I've learned to ignore them. I'm moving out next week, breaking my lease and forfeiting my deposit. I don't care. Before I leave, I'm posting this here as a warning. If you ever hear scratching or whispering coming from beneath the stairs, don't investigate. Don't let curiosity get the better of you, because some doors are meant to stay closed. There's a bridge on the outskirts of town that everyone in the area knows to avoid after sunset. They call it Whispering Bridge because of the eerie, disembodied murmurs people claim to hear when they cross it at night. For as long as I can remember, stories about the bridge have been passed down like ghostly folklore. The phantom footsteps, the chilling breeze, and most famously, the girl who lingers there. Her story is always the same, retold with hushed tones around campfires and at sleepovers. Decades ago, a girl in a white dress was seen walking across the bridge late at night. She never made it to the other side. Some say she was the victim of a violent crime. Others claim she fell, while the more superstitious insist she jumped and now haunts the bridge, seeking vengeance or peace. I never believed any of it. At least not until I met her. A dare to remember. It was one of those summer nights where boredom pushed us to do something reckless. My best friends, Sarah and Mike, were relentless with their dares. When they brought up the bridge, I laughed it off. "Come on, Anna," Mike teased. "You're always saying ghosts aren't real. Prove it." "I'll go with you," Sarah added, smirking. "We'll just take a quick walk across, snap some pics, and head back." It was stupid, but I didn't want to be the one who chickened out. So, a little before midnight, the three of us drove out to Whispering Bridge. The air felt heavy as we approached, the kind of weight that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. The bridge itself was ancient, its wooden planks warped and creaking underfoot. "All right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We walk to the middle, take a picture, and leave. Easy." The first signs. We hadn't even made it halfway across when the atmosphere shifted. The cool night air turned unnaturally cold, and the wind seemed to carry faint whispers that I couldn't quite make out. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, clutching her phone tightly. Mike shrugged. "Probably just the wind." But his voice wavered. We stopped at the center of the bridge, and Sarah raised her phone to take a picture. As the flash illuminated the darkness, we all saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the bridge. It was a girl. She was pale, wearing a tattered white dress that fluttered as if caught in a breeze we couldn't feel. Her head was tilted slightly, her long hair obscuring her face. "Who's that?" Mike whispered, his bravado gone. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding. "Maybe it's someone messing with us." Sarah tried to snap another picture, but her phone froze, the screen glitching. The girl took a step forward. "The chase." "We should leave," I said, already backing away. But as soon as we turned, the whispers grew louder. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were frantic, overlapping voices. It sounded like dozens of people were speaking at once, but none of the words made sense. Then came the footsteps. They were slow at first, matching our pace as we hurried back toward the car. But they grew faster, heavier, until it sounded like someone, or something, was running at us. "Don't look back," Sarah screamed, gripping my arm. Mike, of course, looked back. "Oh God," he gasped. "She's running!" I didn't need to see her to know he was right. The pounding footsteps were practically on top of us. We sprinted the last few feet to the car, throwing ourselves inside and locking the doors. Mike fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he started the engine. Just as the headlights flickered on, we saw her again. She was standing directly in front of the car, her head still tilted, her face obscured. But this time, she raised a hand and pointed at us. The whispers turned into a deafening roar. The Mark Mike hit the gas, swerving around her and speeding down the narrow road. None of us spoke until we were safely back in town. When we finally stopped, Sarah broke the silence. "Did anyone else see her face?" I shook my head. "I didn't look." Mike swallowed hard. "I did." "What did you see?" His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel. "It wasn't right. Her eyes, they were completely black. And her mouth, it was smiling. But it wasn't human." None of us slept that night. We all tried to forget about what happened, convincing ourselves it was just a trick of the light or our imaginations. But things didn't go back to normal. The next morning, Sarah found scratches on her arms that hadn't been there before. They looked like claw marks. Mike started hearing whispers when he was alone, even in broad daylight. And me? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing at the end of the bridge, pointing at me. The final warning. A week later, Sarah stopped answering our calls. When I went to her house, her mom said she'd locked herself in her room and refused to come out. Mike disappeared the next day. His car was found abandoned near the bridge. Now, it's just me. I haven't gone back to the bridge, but I know it's only a matter of time. Every night I hear the footsteps outside my window. And last night, for the first time, I saw her standing in my yard, pointing at me. I don't think I'll make it through the week. I've been an avid reader of r/no sleep for years, but I never thought I'd have my own story to share. What I'm about to tell you happened last summer, and even now, I still get chills thinking about it. It started when my best friend Caleb suggested we take a weekend trip to a remote cabin he found on a rental site. Caleb loved the outdoors, and I figured some time away from the city would be good for both of us. The listing seemed almost too good to be true. A fully furnished cabin deep in the woods, complete with a fire pit, hiking trails, and even a small lake nearby. The price was suspiciously low, but Caleb shrugged it off, saying it was probably because it wasn't a popular spot. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed was how isolated the cabin was. The dirt road leading to it was barely wide enough for Caleb's truck, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. The place itself looked rustic but cozy, with a wraparound porch and a chimney that hinted at warm, crackling fires. But something felt off. The cabin was surrounded by thick woods, and even in the daylight, the shadows between the trees seemed darker than they should have been. There was a strange stillness in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. The first night. We spent the evening settling in and exploring the area. The inside of the cabin was surprisingly clean, with all the basics we'd need for the weekend. There was even a stack of firewood by the hearth. After dinner, we built a fire outside and sat under the stars, trading ghost stories like we used to in college. Caleb, ever the skeptic, laughed at most of mine, insisting there was always a logical explanation for the supernatural. But as the fire burned lower, I noticed something strange. The forest, which had been filled with the sounds of crickets and owls, had gone completely silent. "Do you hear that?" I asked Caleb. "Hear what?" "Exactly." He frowned, brushing it off as my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The uninvited guest that night, I woke up to a sound. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but it grew louder, more deliberate. It was coming from outside. I crept to the window and peered out. At first I didn't see anything, just the faint glow of moonlight on the trees. But then a figure stepped into view. It was standing at the edge of the forest, too far away to make out any details. But it was tall, unnaturally so, and completely still. I thought about waking Caleb, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. Instead, I locked all the doors and windows and tried to convince myself it was just a tree or a shadow playing tricks on me. The next morning, I told Caleb about what I saw. He laughed it off, saying it was probably a deer or a trick of the light. But I could tell he was uneasy. We spent the day hiking, trying to put the strange incident behind us. But no matter where we went, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. The cabin's secret. That evening, Caleb decided to check out the attic. He'd always been curious about old buildings, and the hatch in the ceiling had been taunting him since we arrived. I stayed downstairs, nursing a beer and scrolling through my phone. A few minutes later, I heard Caleb call out, "You might want to see this." Reluctantly, I climbed the ladder and joined him in the attic. It was dusty and cramped, filled with old furniture and boxes. But that wasn't what caught my attention. In the far corner of the room was a stack of Polaroid photos. They were spread out on the floor like someone had been looking through them recently. Most of them were blurry or too dark to make out, but the ones that were clear made my blood run cold. They were photos of people. Some were taken inside the cabin, others in the woods. But the scariest part was that none of the people in the photos looked happy. They looked terrified. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. Caleb didn't answer. He was staring at one photo in particular, a Polaroid of two people sitting by a campfire. It was us. The final night. We decided to leave first thing in the morning. But that night, the noises started again. This time, they weren't outside. They were coming from inside the cabin. We barricaded ourselves in the bedroom, clutching the small hatchet we'd brought for chopping firewood. The noises grew louder. Footsteps, whispers, the creak of the attic ladder, and then silence. It stayed that way for hours, until the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains. When we finally worked up the courage to leave the bedroom, we found the cabin empty. But on the kitchen table, there was a single Polaroid. It was a photo of us, taken while we were asleep in the bedroom. We didn't look back as we sped away from the cabin. The aftermath. When we got home, Caleb tried to contact the rental site to report the cabin, but the listing was gone, and the account that had posted it was deactivated. We never found out who or what was in the cabin with us that night. But sometimes, late at night, I think I hear footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if we really escaped. Growing up in a small rural town, stories of the old horse farm on the edge of the woods were whispered like local folklore. The farm had been abandoned for decades, left to rot after a series of inexplicable tragedies. Horses had gone missing, barns burned to the ground, and the owner, Mr. Delaney, vanished without a trace one stormy night. I never believed the stories, though, at least not until I found myself there one fateful evening. The dare. It started with my friends, Jason and Lily, on one of those lazy weekends when we had nothing better to do. Jason had heard rumors about strange lights and sounds coming from the farm, and Lily, always up for a thrill, suggested we check it out. "Come on, it'll be fun," Lily said, her grin daring us to refuse. I hesitated. Something about the farm had always unsettled me, even from a distance, but I wasn't about to let them think I was scared. We packed flashlights and drove out at sunset, parking a short walk away to avoid being seen. The farm loomed ahead of us, its silhouette dark against the fiery orange sky. First signs. The property was eerily quiet as we approached. The barn doors hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze, and the once vibrant paddocks were overgrown with weeds. A rusted wind vane creaked atop the barn, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. "Creepy," Jason muttered, shining his flashlight around. "Let's check out the stables first," Lily suggested, already walking toward the shadowy structure. The stables were in worse shape than I expected. Cobwebs hung in thick curtains from the beams, and the air smelled of damp wood and decay. The stalls were empty, but claw marks gouged deep into the wood told a story I didn't want to imagine. "Do you think these were made by the horses?" I asked, running my fingers over the deep grooves. Jason shook his head. "No way. These are too big, too deliberate." That's when we heard it. A faint rhythmic tapping coming from the far end of the stables. "Is someone there?" Lily called out, her voice braver than I felt. No answer. Jason and I exchanged uneasy glances, but Lily was already moving toward the sound. The first encounter. At the end of the stables, we found a single stall that was strangely pristine, untouched by the decay that had consumed the rest of the farm. Inside, an old rocking horse sat in the middle of the straw-covered floor, gently swaying as if someone had just left it. "Okay, that's creepy," Jason said, backing away. Lily stepped closer, shining her flashlight over the toy. "It's just a rocking horse, you guys. Probably left behind by the Delaney family." As she reached out to touch it, the air grew icy cold, and the faint smell of burned wood filled the stall. The rocking horse abruptly stopped moving. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my breath visible in the freezing air. Before anyone could respond, a low, guttural whinny echoed through the stables, followed by the unmistakable sound of hooves on wood. "They said there weren't any horses left," Jason stammered, his flashlight darting around. "They also said the place was haunted," I muttered, grabbing Lily's arm. "We need to leave." The shadows in the barn. As we hurried back outside, the barn doors slammed shut behind us with a deafening crash. The sun had fully set, leaving us in near darkness except for the thin beams of our flashlights. "We should just go," I said, my voice trembling, but Lily shook her head. "We came here to see what's going on, and I'm not leaving until we check the barn." Jason groaned but followed her, and I reluctantly brought up the rear. Inside, the barn was cavernous and pitch black, the air thick with dust. Strange symbols were scrawled across the walls in what looked like dried mud, or blood. "What is this place?" Jason whispered. Lily pointed her flashlight at the loft above us. "Let's check up there." I didn't want to, but I followed as we climbed the creaking ladder. The loft was cluttered with old equipment and bales of hay, but what caught our attention was the large mirror propped against the far wall. It was cracked, the glass warped and discolored, but it reflected more than just our faces. Behind us, shadowy figures moved silently, their forms twisted and equine. "They're behind us," Jason hissed, stumbling backward. When we turned, the barn was empty. The escape. A sudden deafening neigh shook the barn, and the loft trembled beneath us. The mirror began to glow faintly, and the shadowy figures stepped through, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Run!" Lily screamed, pushing past us. We scrambled down the ladder, the barn shaking violently as the creatures gave chase. Their hoofbeats thundered behind us as we ran out into the open field. The car was still a quarter-mile away, and the shadowy horses were gaining. Just when it seemed like they'd overtake us, the old wind vane on the barn snapped loose and crashed to the ground, sending up a shower of sparks. The creatures stopped abruptly, their forms dissolving into the night as if they'd never been there. We didn't stop running until we reached the car, gasping for air and shaking with fear. The aftermath. None of us spoke on the drive home, and we agreed never to talk about what happened at the farm. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the faint sound of hooves on pavement outside my window. The next morning, I found claw marks on my bedroom door. When I moved into the little house at the end of Birchwood Lane, I thought it would be a fresh start. It was small but cozy, perfect for a young professional looking to get out of the city chaos. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but I brushed it off. Maybe the landlord was just desperate to fill it. The first week was uneventful, filled with unpacking boxes and getting accustomed to the creaky floors and drafty windows. By the second week, though, I began to notice the subtle oddities. Doors slightly ajar that I swore I'd closed, items not where I'd left them, and that persistent feeling of being watched. I chalked it up to paranoia and a vivid imagination. Until the night everything changed. The noise in the kitchen. It started with a noise, soft, almost imperceptible. I was curled up on the couch, a mug of tea in hand, watching an old black and white movie. The sound came from the kitchen, a faint clink of glass. At first, I ignored it. Houses make noises, especially old ones. But then I heard it again, this time louder. I paused the movie, straining to listen. The house was silent. Too silent. I got up reluctantly, clutching my phone like a weapon, and made my way to the kitchen. The tile floor was cold beneath my feet as I flipped on the light. Nothing seemed out of place. The dishes were still in the sink, the pantry door was closed, and the fridge hummed quietly. I shook my head, laughing nervously at myself. "Get a grip," I muttered, turning off the light. As I headed back to the living room, I heard it again. A soft clink, like glass tapping against glass. The shadow by the window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This time the sound wasn't coming from the kitchen. It was behind me, near the window. Slowly I turned around. The curtains swayed slightly, though no breeze came from the tightly closed windows. And then I saw it. A shadow, tall and thin, moved just beyond the fabric. It wasn't the shape of a tree or the reflection of a passing car. It was deliberate, humanoid. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The shadow stilled. I took a cautious step forward, my phone gripped tightly in my hand. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, wide-eyed and pale, but nothing else moved. The shadow was gone. I told myself it must have been my imagination, a trick of the light. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The locked door. Determined to shake off the unease, I decided to head to bed early. I double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, closed the curtains tightly, and made sure every light was off. As I climbed into bed, the house settled into its usual silence. I left my bedside lamp on, just in case. I must have drifted off, but I woke suddenly to the sound of footsteps. At first I thought they were outside, someone walking on the gravel driveway. But as I listened, the sound grew louder. They were inside. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway toward my bedroom. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. The footsteps stopped. I reached for my phone, dialing 911, but the line was dead. The screen displayed no signal, though I'd never had trouble with reception before. That's when the doorknob rattled. The figure in the corner. I jumped out of bed, pressing myself against the far wall as the door creaked open. The hallway beyond was pitch black, but I could feel someone, or something, standing there, watching me. A faint whisper broke the silence. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was low and menacing. Suddenly the door slammed shut, and the room plunged into darkness. My bedside lamp had gone out. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the small room. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, hunched and motionless, was a figure. Its face was obscured, its body cloaked in shadow, but its presence was undeniable. "Get out!" I screamed, throwing the flashlight at it. The light flickered as it hit the wall, and when the beam steadied, the figure was gone. The final hours. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the floor, clutching a kitchen knife, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. When dawn finally broke, I grabbed my keys and bolted. I didn't bother packing, I just needed to leave. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The little house sat quietly at the end of the lane, bathed in soft morning light. But just for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing in the upstairs window, watching me leave. Epilogue. I never went back to that house, not even to collect my belongings. I heard later from the landlord that the next tenant lasted only a month before moving out under similarly strange circumstances. I don't know what haunted that place, but sometimes late at night, I still hear the sound of footsteps echoing in my mind. I was driving back from my parents' house, a good 3-hour journey through long stretches of highway bordered by dense forest. The kind of road where the radio signal cuts out, leaving you alone with your thoughts and the hum of your engine. It was close to midnight, and the road was eerily empty. No headlights in my rearview mirror, no oncoming cars, just the unbroken yellow lines stretching endlessly ahead. Then my phone buzzed. A text notification. I frowned, surprised. My phone had been out of service since I entered the forested section of the highway. Curious, I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. You shouldn't have taken this route. I let out a nervous laugh. Must have been a wrong number or some kind of prank. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and focused on the road. The first sign. About 10 minutes later, I noticed something strange. I had been driving at a steady 60 miles per hour, yet I kept passing the same mile marker, mile 237. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but as I passed it a third, then a fourth time, my stomach tightened. I slowed the car and pulled over to the shoulder, letting the engine idle as I stared back at the road. The sign was visible in the rearview mirror. It looked ordinary, just like any other mile marker. But when I glanced ahead, I saw it again. Another mile 237 sign. This can't be right, I muttered. I pulled back onto the road and sped up, determined to break free of whatever loop I was caught in. The stranger on the road. The fifth time I passed mile 237, I saw him. A man was standing on the shoulder, his back to me. He was tall, wearing a dark coat that billowed slightly in the breeze. His posture was rigid, his head tilted as if listening for something. I slowed down instinctively, my headlights sweeping over him. "Hey!" I called out through the open window. He didn't turn around. Against my better judgment, I stopped the car and rolled to a stop a few feet away. "Do you need help?" Finally, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face me. His face was pale, unnaturally so, and his eyes, they were black. Not just the pupils, his entire eyes were pools of inky darkness that seemed to absorb the light around them. My chest tightened as an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. "Turn back," he said, his voice low and gravelly, as if it were coming from deep underground, "before it's too late." Without another word, he stepped backward into the darkness, disappearing as though he'd never been there. The endless loop. I hit the gas, my heart racing. The headlights cut through the void of the forest, but the road seemed to stretch endlessly. I didn't care about the speed limit anymore. I just needed to get out of there. But no matter how fast I drove, the road didn't change. And then I saw the mile marker again. Mile 237. This time, there was a car parked on the shoulder. A rusted, broken-down sedan that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. The driver's door was open, and a figure slumped against the steering wheel. I slowed down, hesitating. The figure didn't move. Against my better judgment, I stopped and got out. As I approached the car, a foul stench hit me, a mix of rot and decay. The figure was a man, his face sunken and decomposed, his eyes hollow sockets. In his lap was a handwritten note. "You'll never leave." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and sprinted back to my car. The pursuit. As I sped away, my rearview mirror caught movement behind me. Something was chasing me, a shadowy, amorphous shape that moved unnaturally fast, gaining on me with every passing second. I floored the accelerator, but the thing was relentless. My car shook as the speedometer climbed past 100, the engine roaring in protest. Suddenly, the shadow leapt forward, slamming into the back of my car. The impact sent me swerving across the empty highway. I fought for control, gripping the steering wheel tightly, and managed to steady the car. But when I looked back, the shadow was gone. The escape. My relief was short-lived. Ahead, the road forked, a left turn leading into darkness, and a right turn with a faint flickering light in the distance. I didn't hesitate. I took the right turn, the car skidding slightly as I rounded the bend. The light grew brighter, resolving into the glow of a gas station. It was old and decrepit, but it was something. I pulled into the lot and stumbled out of the car, my legs trembling. The station was empty. The windows were boarded up and the pumps were rusted relics from decades past. But in the middle of the lot stood the man from the road. "You made it," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "What is this place? What's happening to me?" I demanded. He tilted his head, those black eyes glinting. "You should have turned back." Before I could respond, the world around me began to dissolve. The gas station, the man, the car, they all faded into a swirling void of darkness. The return. I woke up in my car, parked on the side of the highway. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the forest. There was no mile 237 sign in sight, no rusted sedan, no shadow chasing me. For a brief moment I thought it had all been a nightmare, but when I glanced at the passenger seat, my blood ran cold. There, resting neatly on the upholstery, was the handwritten note, "You'll never leave." I stumbled across a thread on Reddit that I can't stop thinking about. It was one of those late-night rabbit holes when you're too tired to sleep but too awake to stop scrolling. The thread was titled, "Have you ever had a roommate just disappear?" At first I thought it was a joke, maybe some creative writing exercise, but the OP, original poster, seemed genuinely distraught. The story they shared went something like this. They lived in a small college town with a roommate named Connor. Connor was the kind of guy who always kept to himself, but was reliable. He paid rent on time, cleaned up after himself, and occasionally joined in for movie nights. Then, one day, Connor was gone. His bed was neatly made, his books still stacked on the desk, and his phone charger still plugged into the wall. There was no note, no text, no call. His wallet and keys were missing, but everything else was untouched. OP called the police after a day of no contact, but they were told to wait 48 hours before filing a missing persons report. By the time the report was filed, Connor's trail had gone cold. His phone was off, and there were no transactions on his bank account. The police treated it as if he'd left voluntarily. The thread spiraled into hundreds of comments. Some people shared their own creepy roommate stories. Others offered theories. Maybe Connor had run off to start a new life. Maybe he had debts or enemies. Or maybe, just maybe, something more sinister had happened. One comment stood out to me. It was from an account with no profile picture and a username like anon_547893. It simply said, "He didn't leave. Check the attic." The thread went silent after that. OP never responded. 2 weeks later, someone else posted about the thread on a different subreddit, claiming to be a friend of the OP. They said that after reading the comment, OP had indeed checked the attic of their old house. What they found chilled me to my core. The attic was mostly empty, except for a few cardboard boxes filled with old junk. But in the far corner, where the ceiling slanted so low you had to crawl, they found a small hatch that led to an even smaller crawl space. Inside were a blanket, an empty water bottle, and a stack of crumpled papers. The papers were filled with nonsensical writing, numbers, strange symbols, and the same phrase repeated over and over, "Don't let him in." But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked between the papers was a photo of Connor. He looked terrified, his face pale and eyes wide, as if he had seen something unimaginable. No one knows who took the photo. Since then, the OP has deleted their Reddit account, and any posts related to the thread seem to have vanished. People claim they've seen screenshots, but none of them feel credible. The story has stuck with me, though. Every time I go to bed, I find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering what might be above me. And sometimes, when the house is too quiet, I think I hear faint scratching sounds coming from the attic. But I tell myself it's just my imagination, right? It was a quiet Friday night, and Megan was gearing up for her usual live stream. Gaming had always been her escape, and over the years, her small corner of the internet had grown into a thriving community of fans who loved watching her play horror games. Her chat was lively, full of familiar usernames. She loved the banter, the scares, and the comfort of knowing she wasn't truly alone in the house. The game for the night was Silent Asylum, a recently released horror title that promised plenty of jump scares and eerie atmosphere. Megan had her snacks ready, her headset on, and her room dimly lit with neon LED lights. She adjusted her webcam, smiled at the stream, and greeted her viewers. "All right, guys," she said, her voice chipper. "Let's dive in. And no backseat gaming, okay? I'm looking at you, Jake." The chat exploded with laughing emojis and playful comments. Megan launched the game and began exploring the dark, decrepit asylum in the virtual world. The creaking doors and distant whispers sent shivers down her spine, but the familiarity of her audience grounded her. An hour into the stream, Megan was deeply engrossed in the game. The chat was buzzing with reactions to her screams and jokes. She had just found a key to a locked door when something odd happened. A donation alert popped up on the screen. $50 from user unknown. "Nice moves, Megan. Are you alone tonight?" She froze for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Thanks for the donation," she said, trying to brush off the unsettling question. Her chat quickly noticed. "That's creepy. Block them. Don't engage, Megan." She nodded at the comments. "Yeah, probably just some weirdo trying to freak me out. Let's keep going." But as she moved further into the game, a strange sound echoed in her headphones. A faint knock, like someone tapping on a door. She paused the game and looked at the chat. "Did you guys hear that? Was it in the game or?" The chat was divided. Some insisted it was part of the game's ambiance, while others claimed they hadn't heard anything. Megan laughed nervously. "All right, back to it. You guys are probably messing with me." She unpaused the game and continued exploring, but the knocks grew louder. This time, they didn't sound like they were coming from her headphones. They sounded like they were coming from her front door. She muted her mic and removed her headset, straining to listen. The knock came again, louder and more insistent. Her heart raced. She glanced at her phone, ready to call someone, but then the chat caught her attention. "Is someone at your door? Megan, are you okay? Check the camera outside." She remembered the security app on her phone and quickly pulled it up. The feed from her front porch camera was grainy but clear. No one was there. "See? Nothing to worry about," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she unmuted the mic. "Probably just my neighbors being weird. Back to the game." The chat didn't seem convinced, but Megan pushed forward. She didn't want to let her audience down, even if her nerves were shot. As the game's tension escalated, so did the strange occurrences in her house. Her lights flickered briefly, and she thought she saw a shadow move across the hallway behind her on the webcam. The chat exploded. "Who's behind you? Megan, turn around. Call the cops." Megan spun around in her chair, her heart pounding. The hallway was empty. "Guys, not funny," she said, forcing a laugh. "You're going to give me a heart attack." But then she noticed something chilling. Her webcam, which she hadn't touched, was slightly tilted. She adjusted it back and tried to focus on the game, but her hands were shaking. Another donation alert popped up. $100 from use unknown. You're not as alone as you think. Megan's breath caught in her throat. The chat went wild, urging her to end the stream and call someone for help. Just as she was about to log off, her screen glitched. The game froze and a distorted image appeared, a grainy view of her own living room. She gasped and ripped off her headset, staring at the screen in disbelief. The image was live, showing her sitting at her desk in real time. "Megan?" a voice whispered, low and raspy. It wasn't coming from her headphones. It was coming from inside the house. She bolted up from her chair, knocking it over in her panic. Grabbing her phone, she ran to the nearest closet and locked herself inside. Her chat was still active on her monitor, the viewers spamming messages. "Run. Get out of the house. Call 911. Megan dialed the police, whispering her address and situation as calmly as she could. The operator assured her help was on the way. From inside the closet, she heard heavy footsteps echoing through the house, slow and deliberate. They paused right outside the closet door. The doorknob rattled. "Megan," the voice whispered again, almost playfully. Her blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the back wall, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Suddenly the rattling stopped, replaced by silence. Minutes felt like hours until she heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The footsteps retreated, followed by the sound of a door slamming shut. When the police arrived, they found no one in the house. The front door was wide open, but there were no signs of forced entry. Megan's chat had captured everything: the shadow, the tilted webcam, even the live feed that had mysteriously disappeared when the authorities searched her computer. That night, she deleted her streaming accounts, packed a bag, and stayed with a friend. She couldn't explain what had happened, and the police couldn't either. The only clue was a sticky note left on her desk. Written in shaky, smudged handwriting were the words, "Nice stream." Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. I hope you found some peace and comfort. Before you drift off completely, let me know in the comments what time it is where you are and which country you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Until next time, rest well and sweet dreams.